What's next after the impeachment decision by the Congress?
Yes, as you already reported, the Constitutional Court will review the impeachment. At max, they can spend 180 days, and once their decision has been made, I mean, we should have a national, the presidential election within the 60 days. The thing is, politically speaking, now every candidate, possible candidate, and every party should seriously think about their coming presidential election. I think that's the situations right now, because many of us assume that Constitutional Court, of course it depends on their time, but we feel like, I mean, they will highly likely to pass the impeachment.
Right. Well, if it is about 6 months to the utmost that the Constitutional Court would make a decision, that means, Professor Hwang, there is the possibility that the Prime Minister of the current administration will still be the one in the government when a lot of changes are happening. First of all, US President Donald Trump comes into power January, and then there are several other series of events involving the top South Korean leaders with his counterparts from all over Asia and some of the other regions. So what would this mean when it comes to South Korea's decision power in terms of its relations with the most important ally, the United States, and also with some of its neighbors, including China, Japan?
Well, I think that is absolutely a very important consideration. However, we have to understand that especially when it comes to the United States ROK relationship and this alliance, it is actually a far more deeply embedded relationship. There are many bureaucrats, technocrats, and others that behind the scenes have developed the relationship. So in fact, actually, the president is really just the face. So we see this already. This is the transition period, and there are many South Korean officials within the Ministry of Defense, within the alliance relationship, that are already building relationships with the Trump administration to be. So I don't actually expect, I think there to be a very smooth transition regardless of who sits in the Blue House or the Prime Minister's office.
But Professor Hwang, there is one unique point some might argue about this new administration coming to power in Washington, that it might be a little bit different when it comes to its way of doing things and saying things. When I say a little bit different, I'm being very diplomatic here. So the communication requires more attention and more efforts, definitely, particularly when Mr. Trump, running for president, asking South Korea to be on its own responsible for its defense, or at least to a certain extent. So once again, I want to put that question back to you, Professor Hwang.
Yes, and again, I think you have an excellent point. And I do think this is what, frankly, the entire world is worried about. But to be honest, I think nobody knows, and Mr. Trump, certainly that is part of his characteristic, and perhaps he is purposely trying to cultivate a kind of attitude of uncertainty, unexpectedness. We simply don't know. But again, I do point out that what is more important is, frankly, his selection for the potential Secretary of Defense.
Right.
Now, of course, he has to be confirmed. But if this is the case, again, this sends actually a signal that it is really the bureaucrats and the technocrats, the high-level ones, within the Pentagon, within the U.S. Forces Korea, within the Pacific Command, and all of these others who have had long experience, who will continue to manage the relationship. So again, the leadership at the top is really just the flamboyant leadership. Well, I don't think it'll really affect the day-to-day relationship.
I see your point, Professor Hwang. Going to you. Going to you, Dr. Lim, still, this selection of defense secretary is a general. Of course, that's already very different when it comes to U.S. tradition. But that's not the point. It's what's going on in the U.S. What's important is more with South Korea. Is there going to be a strong enough leadership coming up in South Korea in its new administration that would be able to bargain and negotiate hard with a very different administration in the US, and certainly facing a very different situation in Asia with all the moving factors? Dr. Lim, I think that's even more important question for you.
Yes. Okay, thank you for the question. Yes, you're right. As the other panelists already pointed out, things are fluid here too. Many people we still don't know because Mr. Trump was not a professional politician before the election, so we cannot precisely predict what kind of policy directions he's going to show. But as far as I hear, especially in this town from other Asia or Korea specialists, they are almost all of them have kept emphasizing that the alliance relationship with the ROK and with the Japan is very, very important. It's not even kind of negotiable thing. It's not a bargain. It's not a burden. So that's what I heard in this town continuously for the last couple of weeks or even longer than that. So I don't think substantial changes will be made with the new coming administration here in the United States. But you're totally right. The thing is, the counterpart of the United States, now the leadership in the Korea is that uncertain, which is pretty unfortunate. But if the process can accelerate it, if so, again, they will have another new president, probably around like a summer. I cannot again precisely predict when it will be, but it will pretty likely to have we're going to have another president in the summer. Right. And the thing is, even though now the opposition leaders can be much more popular or attractive compared to the conservative, but I don't think, again, the substantial changes will be made by even the opposition leaders either. So I think that might be my observations over the situations now.
Dr. Gao, in Beijing, China, of course, is a neighbor, and China is observing what's happening in South Korea. There used to be some very strong ties between the South Korean President, Ms. Park, and the Chinese president. However, the issue of that has really become a troublemaker in the relations. And that issue has not been solved even at this time. Meanwhile, you see South Korea, Japan establishing this military exchange mechanism concerning intelligence that puts China, it seems, more question mark about what is the nature of relations between South Korea and China. So having set the stage for you, may I ask you, Dr. Gao, what would be the angles of the observation from the Chinese side? How is China looking at all these possibilities when it comes to new leaders in South Korea?
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, I would say the ongoing scandal involving President Park of South Korea, as well as the impeachment decision made today, as well as the immediate suspension of his exercise of any function as the president of ROK, could not have happened at the worst time. You mentioned the incoming President Donald Trump in the United States and the worsening of the situation on the Korean Peninsula. And now that South Korea does not have an effective president, and that really adds great uncertainty to the situation. Now, of relevance to China in particular is the allegation that the decision to install the THAAD anti-missile system by the government of the Republic of Korea under President Park actually was intervened with by her private advisors. And that's very disturbing, because if that allegation is proven to be correct, that means that decision in itself may be flawed fundamentally, and I don't think the people in the Republic of South Korea would tolerate such a decision. That means if, of course, that allegation is proven to be correct, the whole decision to install that system in South Korea may need to be reviewed. And that in itself should be welcomed by China, but that will really create more uncertainty in relations between ROK and the United States and also
There's a lot of
Japan.
Possibilities that in your answer, but of course we'll have to see how the legal investigation has been going on. Having said that, though, let me go to Dr. Lim. What about that investigation? Now, President Park, well, she is still the President Park until the Constitutional Court ruled otherwise, has been accused by a state prosecutor that she has involved in some of the specific illegal wrongdoings of her confidant, whether attracting money from companies for their own purposes, or some of the involvement of private confidant in the state affairs, including what Dr. Gao just mentioned about that system. So, Dr. Lim, which stage of investigation are we in? Under the current circumstances, how will President Park be investigated? Will she still have immunity toward the lawmakers, toward the prosecutors?
Mm-hmm. Yes, again, the things are very uncertain as of now. Again, the prosecution is one thing, and the Constitutional Court is the other thing. These two are, of course, not mutually exclusive. Right. But Constitutional Court's judgments or review of the impeachment is much more about whether or not she violated the spirit of our Constitution. Whereas the prosecution, they're gonna investigate it on the criminal aspect of her wrongdoings, if there are anything, right? So these two are actually different track. So we will see these two different tracks simultaneously. I cannot precisely predict which one should be or will be done earlier than the other. So these, again, these two things are, I have to emphasize that, again, the different from each other. Again, so that is why I cannot, again, give you the exact timeline as of now. Yeah, but again, the Constitutional Court will again review whether or not the impeachment is acceptable according to the Constitution.
Professor Hwang, it is not the first case that the South Korean president was impeached. Earlier, there was also President Roh Moo-hyun. However, he was later reinstalled by the Constitutional Court, suggesting he is not necessarily violating his presidential obligations, only some wrongdoings. But how much chance is there, from your perspective, President Park would have about a reinstallment by the Constitutional Court, if there's anything like that?
Well, it's very difficult to predict, and I certainly wouldn't presume to do so. I do think you are exactly correct in focusing on the fact that this is up to the Constitutional Courts, and it could actually go either way, because it really rests on technical aspects of whether any constitutional laws were violated.
Right.
I think actually the more important observation here is to look at how far along South Korea has come as a democracy. It's really very fascinating, because the one thing that was most striking and interesting to me, frankly, this time is not that this president, again, is involved in a scandal. In fact, every single South Korean president to date has been involved in some sort of political scandal, which is not good. On the other hand, if you look at the process of the popular demonstrations, it was remarkably peaceful. Right. There were absolutely no incidents of violence, no riots, and this is actually very unique to South Korea.
Right.
So I think that this is actually a positive indication.
Well, we would
despite
love
all the negative aspects
we would love
of the
to
scandal.
see the silver lining of the clouds. However, there are some very pragmatic issues that we need to figure out, Dr. Gao. That is, are we seeing the end of a generation of leaders with President Park? I mean, of course, she probably has her own problems when it comes to the ways of governing, when it comes to some of her personal dealing with the issues as prosecutors would investigate. But she is the offspring of an earlier president, well known for getting South Korea out of poverty, but at the same time for being iron fist throughout the administration. And she became a winner of politics consecutively, eventually got her into the Blue House. But the question is, will South Korean establishments, like herself, still be the ones that are likely to come into the Blue House for the future? You see the trends elsewhere changing, the wind blowing differently. What about South Korea from your perspective, Dr.
I
Gao?
think when President Park won the election and became the president of ROK, there was great expectation for her. And in China, there was actually great respect for her as the female president, and as having risen to the top of ROK through her own personal perseverance, despite of great family tragedies. And she actually managed to improve relations between China and ROK quite significantly until the last moment when this third anti-missile system was enforced.
Yeah, so what about these generational leaders? Is it going to be a disconnect for the future?
Yeah, and I think there is a little bit of a disappointment to see her downfall, and I wish her all the best wishes, regardless of whatever the outcome. I think her downfall eventually will make it much less possible for the future president of ROK to command as much respect and trust from the people, and that will be a problem going forward, because we cannot afford to have a weak president in ROK or a weak government in ROK, given the possibility of rising tensions on the Korean Peninsula.
That's right. That we all understand that part very well. Professor Hwang, your take on this?
Yes, I actually think that you make an extremely important and profound observation. I think it's important to remember that in 2013 is when we had the complete shift of new leaderships in all of the major Northeast Asian countries. This included South Korea, Japan, even North Korea. Kim Jong-un came into power, and of course in your own country, in China, with leader Xi Jinping, and even Putin. What they all had in common was each of these were essentially had historical legacies. There were descendants of their fathers or grandfathers who used to be of past leaders. And so they all have an important historical legacy and a very important desire to carry that on. And I think you're exactly correct. President Park's downfall, and then now with the election of Trump, you know, outside of Washington, I think this could actually signal that the people in Asia and elsewhere are just no longer happy with the old leaders, the elites that are carrying on historical legacies.
Well, it depends on what these people have been doing, isn't it? Their own track record, extremely important.
That's right. Yes,
Dr. Lim, your take on this before we come to the end of our discussion.
Yes. I really feel, as a South Korean national as well, many of us feel real changes should be made soon. Of course, we have been proud of our economic growth, and we have been proud of our political development as well. And the development or state-minded has been working very well, efficiently, effectively. But now it's a totally different situation. The global economy is different, and our society is way different from the Park Chung-hee's period.
Okay.
So that is why I think many people feel that. I mean, that we really should change and finish the old style of our government or our governance style. So I feel, again, that that's the South Korean majorities are feeling like that way too. So I'm looking forward to the real changes.